All right, Mr. Kevin,
Mr. Joel,
2024 football season is over.
it is.
What are your initial thoughts?
Well, this this season was an interesting one. Aside from the wonderful Chiefs continuing their dynasty, um, there were a lot of interesting things that happened this year, which I'm sure you'd agree. The first thing that I thought of was the NFC North just decided to take a page out of the AFC North from last season and go ridiculous on everybody else.
That's very true.
Between the Vikings and Lions going into week 18, trying to be the number one seed, the Packers only being a measly like 10-win football team that made the wild card. That's three out of the four. And obviously we can't forget the Bears season that went awry when the Hail Mary happened. I had tried to get everything set up when I was preparing for this meeting to where I was gonna like cut to the Hail Mary play, uh, where it just showed it bounce right out of everybody's hands and into the commander's hands in the back of the end zone. But I digress. That was one of my key takeaways. I don't know if you had any follow-up thoughts on that, specifically the NFC North.
NFC North, I think, yeah, just kind of took the playbook out of there. I mean, they've been good for a while. I think about the Packers only been up there, the Lions on the kind of uptick. I feel like the Vikings were definitely to me they were a surprise, especially with
Sam
like
Darnold.
JJ McCarthy going down and Sam
Yeah.
Darnold coming in. Like that seemed I was not as high on them as everyone else was before the season started. And then to do what they did with their backup journeyman quarterback was pretty wild.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. Pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But then another thing that kind of like came out of the NFC North though, and it wasn't just like the quarterback play, it was like the revival of the running back. Because I know everybody's been talking about Saquon Barkley,
Hmm.
everybody's been talking about Derrick Henry, but I was looking at this and there were five running backs that all went over not only 1,400 yards of rushing, but had more than 11 touchdowns per running the football between Bijan Robinson with the Falcons, Jahmyr Gibbs with the Lions, NFC North, and then Jonathan
Hmm.
Taylor with the Colts. Uh, I just couldn't believe how Saquon Barkley had this monumental year, but Derrick Henry finished with less than 100 yards behind him. If it
Yep.
wasn't for Saquon this year, we'd be talking about Derrick Henry having the best running back season. And if it hadn't been for him, we'd be talking about those other guys. And I didn't even mention like Josh Jacobs with the Packers and Kyron Williams with the Rams. They each
Hmm.
had like 1,300 yards and like 14 to 15 touchdowns apiece. So
Yeah.
that was another thing that, loosely connected to the NFC North with Gibbs. It was like revival of the running back this year, which I just found really interesting.
And not even like that. It's the fact that a lot of teams kind of went away from that multiple back system to these one back teams. They go off. Like Saquon's the feature back.
Yeah,
Derrick Henry, like they're not splitting carries as much. But we'll talk about touch on a little bit later. But with those running back seasons, how's that affect the NFL draft, which is
it's going to be interesting.
perceived as a very deep running back class?
Yeah,
Does the norm kind of persist of don't draft a running back in the first round when
I
you
don't
see
think so anymore.
players like a Bijan do really good, Jamar
Right.
Gibbs, which was a surprise pick. When you're looking forward to the draft, how does the season this year affect how those players are drafted going into this year's draft? So
No, you're
I think running back
100%
was a good
right.
thing. You hit that was my big point was survival of the running back was the Giants infamy set on their hard knocks like
Yeah.
we get another one, no big deal, and he just smoked you for 1,000 yards and going to the Super Bowl.
Well, and if you remember from that video, his son also told him to trade up and draft Jaden Daniels, and he didn't do that
Yes,
either. So
and that's a good point as well. You look at the Commanders; they got a new owner, a new head coach, a new quarterback, and they went to the NFC Championship game.
insane.
Insane. And normally you don't see that in football. That's such a fast turnaround. Normally it's kind of like a progression thing. Other
Well,
sports you see
actually,
that faster turnaround. This year it kind of everything changed. We hear football stability is so important. As a Steelers fan, we live on the stability is important. and everything changes. They go to the MC Championship game.
Well, and actually, you speaking about that, I was actually going to save this for later, but it actually goes perfectly with what we're talking about. So you just mentioned how the Commanders had a new owner, a new coach, a new GM, a new quarterback, right? Those we can all agree it's the four cornerstones of any NFL
Yep.
franchise. Well, so I actually have this list that I've been making for, I don't know, since the Broncos won the Super Bowl last time. So almost 10 years now. And going back all the way to
It is on a
2014,
sticky note.
it's actually I have a normal note on my phone. So not a sticky note. But so since 2014, the second to last season when Manning was here, talking about the importance of cornerstones. After that season, that's when John Fox left, all the
Mhm.
coordinators left between Del Rio, Adam Gase, and they brought in Gary Kubiak, right? So if you count that season, they get the new head coach, they win the Super Bowl. But after that, in 2016, they had a new starting quarterback in Trevor Simeon. In 2017, they had a new head coach in Vance Joseph. 2018, they switched quarterbacks to Case Keenum, sorry. Shout out John Elway. In 2019, they had a head coach in Vic Fangio and a quarterback in Joe Flacco. 2020, they brought in Drew Lock as their starting quarterback. 2021, they had a new general manager in George Payton and a new quarterback in Teddy Bridgewater. 22, obviously, they sold to the Walton Penner Group, got a new head coach in Nathaniel Hackett and a quarterback in Let's Ride. 2023, Sean Payton. 2024, Bo Nix. Going into this upcoming season, it's going to be the first time in 10 years that they are actually going to be going in with the exact same owner, GM, head coach, and quarterback. It's truly like derailed the Broncos for a decade. So just I was going to tie that into my Broncos preview, but truly just like going off of what the Commanders did, nothing short of incredible that they were able to shuffle everything out and are right there on the cusp of making the Super Bowl with all these like new to the game people.
I think it kind of shows an evolution of the game is where that longevity coach like changes me much more open and receptive people to make change. I think we've seen a little bit in quarterbacks like with Arizona kind of did when they had Josh Rosen, and next year they drafted Kyler Murray. Teams aren't going to wait those 3 to 4 years to make changes anymore.
No,
They're going to make
100%.
changes, and it could work out great, like a Commanders or like the Broncos, who've kind of struggled to kind of get back there with all the different changing. I think the
Right.
ownership group is very important, but I think for the most part, most teams have a pretty stable ownership. Teams don't get sold a whole lot
Yeah.
on that. But you mentioned the Broncos. We can kind of segue to your Broncos season. The nerd I am, I pull some stats out for you. I'd love to
You
see
did
your
too.
reaction on this and see kind of on
Good
this.
deal.
I was very surprised.
Okay.
So this year they had 3,610 passing yards, which was ranked 20th in the league, and 30 touchdowns. Rushing 1,900 yards, 16th overall. 23 touchdowns, 23rd in touchdowns, I'm sorry, which
Yeah.
was 12th overall, 12th ranking. Yards per attempt was 4.1. The big numbers that I thought were crazy was fourth down conversions. There was 68.2% of fourth down conversions, which was fifth in the league.
Yep.
On top of that, red zone touchdown percentage. I don't know if you know those numbers or not. I was pretty impressed by this. Red zone touchdown percentage was 62.5% of the time in the red zone they scored a touchdown. We'll break down to baseball. We'll do splits here. At home, 72.41% of red zone possessions, they score a touchdown. Only second to, can you guess who is first?
It's the Kansas City Chiefs.
Is not.
Who is it?
It's not a team you think would be.
It's gonna be okay. Let's see. So if
They're
it's a
geographically
percentage.
close to Denver.
Okay. So are we going with the Raiders?
No.
Okay. Who do we got?
Arizona Cardinals.
Probably because they weren't in the red zone all that often this year, but when they were, they did well.
And then away, they were 50% on red zone attempts. I think what's
That makes sense
interesting,
though.
the thing that's interesting is in 2023, the Broncos were 50.85 red zone touchdowns, and this year went to 62.5. That's a huge jump, obviously.
The rookie
Kind of,
quarterback.
yes.
Well, it's amazing
So there's a bunch of
when you
stats I threw out you based on your Denver Broncos. I have the same stats for the Steelers. I'll go over it later. But take me into the mindset of a Broncos fan. How do you feel about this year? What kind of takeaways? What kind of thoughts do you have? Kind of wrapping up the
yeah.
2024 season.
Well, I mean, you said it right off the bat. It's amazing what you can do when you have a quarterback that comes in and actually listens to the play call from the offensive coordinator and a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
You tend to actually like make some of those plays that maybe somebody was just watching number 14 a year ago and didn't look at the two or three people to the left of him just like waving their arms that they were wide open.
And there
But
weren't really
well,
many acquisitions this last offseason, were there? Besides Bo Nix draft.
no, so it's I'm glad you mentioned that. So this was the very first year that the Denver Broncos had to really eat a lot of Russell Wilson's cap hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what they did in the offseason, they made the designation to cut him at a specific time so they could split it up over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
This year they decided they knew they were going to get a rookie quarterback. That was their plan. And
Yeah.
their fallback was obviously going with Zach Wilson, with that just like trading him for a sixth pick. They had that as a low risk, high reward, very cheap.
Yeah.
We need to just bite the bullet here. To get everything fixed with their roster, though, just so they could get under the, you know, cap, they had to cut Justin Simmons, who had been here since 2016,
Mm-hmm.
Josie Jewell, our starting middle linebacker for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Kareem Jackson wasn't brought back. Lloyd Cushenberry, our starting center for the last 4 years, they let him walk in free agency. So we actually had a rookie at center as well. We we really like kind of like had to trim the roster.
Yeah.
He being Sean Payton, they decided to just like kind of like use the younger guys that they had in the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that this season was all about
Which you
they
had to
liked
do with eating so much
yes,
Wilson salary cap. You have to draft well, get cheaper guys, and
100%. Which
make
is
them better.
why which is why when they traded for Zach Wilson, that was something that it was reported was actually like a 6 week process. They were
Mm-hmm.
really trying to hammer out the details on that trade because Sean Payton really thought that he could at least put him in his system and put him in a better chance to succeed than the Jet system.
Yeah.
So Zach Wilson was kind of like their fallback plan to where if they weren't able to get Bo Nix in the draft, they were going to be able to at least say like, okay, this is the year that we literally have, $50 million we're paying to a guy that's not even on our team anymore. We have to get younger, cut a bunch of guys, rip the band-aid off, basically. So that's how this year started, right? So, like from a Broncos fan's perspective, I'm just going to read you some stats on how Bo Nix started. Because here in Denver, everybody's been starved for a quarterback since number 18 left the building and rode off to the sunset, right?
I still find it where the Broncos claim pay man. He paid for like 3 years. You can't claim him.
4 years with four division titles, two Super Bowl appearances, and a Super Bowl title.
He's a
And
Colt in my mind forever. But
I apologize for that way of thinking. So Peyton Manning actually still, as recently as this season, during broadcast watching the Broncos on Monday Night Football, he was still pulling a Von Miller and saying "we," "us," and everything like that. And every time he follows the Colts or says anything about Colts, he says "they." But with
yeah.
Denver, it's "we." So I'm just going to listen to Peyton there, but I digress. So with Bo Nix, so everybody was just hopeful that we saw some flashes, right?
Yeah.
Everyone in Denver, I mean, we talked on draft night. It was a very, I had kind of like told a couple people at work, and you and I may have talked about it in the weeks leading up to the draft. I said Bo Nix was a Sean Payton guy
Yeah.
just
I think
because
everyone
of
thought
how he
that
was in
going
Oregon.
into it. Yeah.
Yes. So even though I weeks before figured Bo Nix would be the pick, as soon as the pick actually came through, there was a lot of like hesitation. And I know a lot of people in Denver felt the same way just because like you don't know if this is going to be the guy. Because by that point, everybody in the media had been talking about how it was like, oh, is he even a first round pick? Maybe he's a mid round or late round pick. So the fact that we drafted him 12th overall, there was still a lot of talent on the board to where it was a very like nerve wracking thing, right?
I think that's the
And
key.
the
I think a
way
lot of people thought they would trade down and still get him at, 18 or something like that. But it goes to the point, if he's your guy, don't mess around, make the pick.
and that's what the Broncos did. They fleeced the Vikings into thinking they were going to get JJ McCarthy so that Bo Nix would slide down. Sean Payton famously talked in nauseum. leading up to the draft about how he loved JJ, how JJ was like an absolute stud when they worked him out one on one. And that same day, George Payton, who was interviewed later when he was asked about Sean's comments, did the whole I really wish that Sean wasn't giving out state secrets, but since we're already talking about it, so they actually feigned a little bit of dysfunction in the room
Yeah,
so that people really thought JJ was the guy and they couldn't have ran quicker to give their pick to Bo Nix. So,
yeah.
but with the Bo Nix experiment, that's the one thing I wanted to touch on. He started the year throwing multiple interceptions every game. His first game as a quarterback, he threw for 138 yards. The very famous Jets 10-9 win in the Meadowlands, where he threw for 60 yards, but one of those happened to be a touchdown. It was a very, very scary kind of beginning to his career here, right? And I can actually pinpoint the season turning around, even though they at that point were 2-2. It was October 6th against the Raiders when they were wearing the amazing throwback jerseys. And the Raiders were looking to go up, I believe, just kind of going off of memory, they were going to be going up by 2 scores very early in the game. One of their
Yeah.
first plays of the game was a long touchdown to Brock Bowers, who a lot of people in Denver had wanted to be wearing blue and orange this year. And they were driving down the field. And that's when Pat Surtain picked it off in the end zone and took it all the way back to the house. After that, Bo Nix started making every throw, lighting it up. And suddenly, for the first time in as long as anybody in Denver can remember, we scored 30 points in a game. Yes, one of them was a pick six,
Hey,
but it was just 2 weeks later that we went to New Orleans and Bo Nix threw it all over the field. And then Carolina. And then even when we lost to the Chiefs in Arrowhead, he did that game winning drive to go down the field and put ourselves in a position to win. And if you just look at his stats after that, he was on pace to, before he trailed off and Jaden Daniels took off. A lot of people out here were talking like, is he going to be the offensive rookie of the year? He's winning offensive rookie of the week. He won offensive rookie of the month. He
yeah.
was starting to do this whole stretch where there was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was a 6 week period where he threw one interception. And that included the losses to Baltimore and the losses to Kansas City. So we started protecting the ball. He was throwing for 300 yards a game. He was throwing for 2 to 3 touchdowns a game. Out of nowhere, he just came alive. And I think that if I were to sum up this last season, even though it ended horrifically in Buffalo, I think everyone out here was like, hey, we've got hope in this guy. And that's
Well,
all that we can ask for after 10 years of misery.
and I think some of you may have overlooked, kind of looking at the other numbers, the defense. Number one league in sacks, ninth in the league in interceptions, and best in the league for tackle for loss. Zach Allen, who I was really high on when he came to Denver 2 years ago, I'm like, this guy's a game changer. He did not change anything this first year. He made a huge jump in the second year. So not even Bo Nix, protecting the ball, doing that, but the defense gaining extra possessions for you, which is huge, obviously.
And I'm glad you mentioned the defense because the craziest stat from this year was actually that the Broncos had more sacks this season than the daunted 2015 Super Bowl winning defense had sacks. They had more sacks than those studs with the Von Millers and the Malik Jacksons and everyone else. So
And they were second in the league, had the second best yards per carry. They kept teams lowest yards per carry in the league, second best. Which I mean, just the defense was stout.
it
Just
was
starting that,
ridiculous.
yeah, yeah.
Speaking of stout defenses, though, your Pittsburgh Steelers
Oh
had
man,
a very interesting year, riddled with coaching rumors and quarterback changes and just all this unnecessary drama that people in Denver are all too familiar with a
yes.
certain player. What uh what happened with the Steelers this year, Joel?
So we're going through it. Obviously, after Ben Roethlisberger retired, we kind of have to look at where we're at now. A few years back, Ben Roethlisberger retired. You don't choose when you suck. That year was a terrible quarterback class. We got Kenny Pickett. He was the best of the
Super
bunch.
bound, Super Bowl bound Kenny
Super
Pickett.
Bowl bound Kenny Pickett. He was awful. Um, Mason Rudolph left because he wanted to be a starter. He wanted a chance, and they weren't going to give it to him there. So you bring in two guys who kind of been kicked around, not great records, but there's optimism there with Russell Wilson and just Justin Fields. Um, I
You
think a
like more?
lot of what was that?
Who did you like? You watched every Steelers game. Who did you
Yeah.
like more? If just as strictly as a quarterback, no drama, no anything else. If Mike Tomlin came out tomorrow and said, "Hey guys, we're actually going to go into 2025 with blank as our quarterback," who do you wish it would be?
So I think it's a complex question. Wait. Who do I think it's going to be? Who do I think it should be?
Who do you think it should be, Joel?
Okay. I think the better quarterback is probably Russell Wilson. But the quarterback is in a vacuum. With the team we have around them, Justin Fields is a better fit. We don't have receivers for Russell to throw to. Our receiving core is a joke. We've got George Pickens, who cries all the time.
Yes.
We've got Calvin Austin, who's good, but nothing. He's a number three at best. Van Jefferson, who I don't even know why he's anywhere near the top of the roster. The rookie we drafted, Roman Wilson, was out the entire year. Um, there's no weapons there for us to make any wrinkles in it. So I think we need the thread of the run to do it. So the better quarterback is Russell Wilson because he can push the ball down the field. Fields doesn't even look for the throw. He's looking to run. He's a one read and run the ball. And it causes him, he tried to, back up, move around. It's just not there yet for him. Not saying it can't be, but I think he's a better pure quarterback. Wilson feels like he got shot. If we're behind the game, Fields isn't bringing us back. With that, I mean, you can neither one of them did great. I mean, passing yards were 27th in the league in passing yards, 24th in passing touchdowns, 27th in yards per game. We're a volume running team, so we run the ball a lot. So like our yards per carry was 21st, but we're 11th overall in rushing yards. We was going to keep running the ball, keep running the ball, keep running the ball on there. Um, so I mean, that just it just crushes. And then the praise I have for the Broncos on those fourth down conversions, the Seals were 38% of fourth down conversions. Second worst in the league, only one team behind us. Red zone, 48%. So 29th in the league. This was interesting though. You'd think we better in the red zone at home. Nope. We were 40% red zone at home, 57% on the road.
Speaking of Russell Wilson, he's in the whole stadium, whole crowd. He thinks a little bit too much about his brand. There
Yeah.
were a lot of issues we had scoring touchdowns the last couple of years when he was the quarterback. And that was also an era where we went on the road Monday Night Football against Buffalo and beat them in a snow game. But then he'd come home against the Colts and he couldn't put up more than 12 points in a game, even when people
Yeah.
were wide open in the end zone. So I think there's something to be said about it's no shock to me that the Steelers went on the road and beat the Commanders in a thriller in Washington, but they dropped the ball in Pittsburgh when Russ had an entire stadium cheering for him. It
Yeah.
gets in his head, man. It gets in his head.
I mean, against good competition was last, all of December. We played good teams and didn't look good. He, yeah, he just didn't look good. But I think if we had more weapons around him, I think that he could maybe do better. But I don't know, man. I feel like he might make mistakes. I feel like he gives us a shot. I feel like he gives us a shot because he can throw the ball down the field. The moon ball is the perfect ball for George Pickens, who is a deep down the field kind of guy. He runs a streak and he'll get open. That's what he wants to do. He is nowhere near my boy Randy Moss, but that type of feel like just throw the ball up and he'll get it, and that's what he can do. Um, but yeah, leaving this season with the Broncos of full optimism, the Steelers are not full of optimism, which is odd to say for a team made the playoffs. Is as we look at our team, it's a lot of questions. I mean, we have no quarterback under contract right now.
That's the biggest problem. Is that the Broncos and Steelers, they took the same record. They both made it to the wild card round and got kind of outclassed by their opponents. And the
Yes.
difference really is the Broncos are like, hey, we know the direction. The Steelers, I mean, Mike Tomlin, all that was talked about this year was he going to be back? And now you have questions at his position and you have questions at the quarterback position to where you don't know where you're going to go from there.
Yeah, I think the Tomlin talk. I mean, football's a business. We start there. His contract is not going to allow them to get rid of him. You're not going to trade him. He's not going to agree to a trade. Like I would say, the Steelers is probably the best coaching job out there because like you're not going to get fired. Like they just don't
True.
fire coaches. So like, why would you trade that for anything that's for a team who like even Chicago? They have a lot of weapons for that, but like that organization's known for kind of having a short fuse with coaches and get rid of them. Like, why would you agree to be traded there? Like, it doesn't
So
make sense.
do you think, so going to, I know the next thing on our agenda was to talk about some offseason quarterback moves. I wanted to touch briefly on the head coaching thing. The only thing I've gotten right so far is that I predicted that Mike McCarthy would take a year off. Do
You
you
didn't
think
predict that. You did
I
predict
did?
that. You did not give him a
I
job. Yeah.
did. Yep. But here's why. Do you think the Steelers let Mike Tomlin play out his contract and then Mike McCarthy, who is focusing on the 2026 head coaching hire cycle, do you think he suddenly becomes a top candidate to take over for Mike in Pittsburgh?
So Tomlin's new extension he just signed kicks in this year. This is the first year of his new
Oh, it
contract.
kicks in this year.
It
Okay.
kicks in this year. So I think it's a 3-year deal, if I'm not mistaken. So, but also you look at this is I want to touch on this as well. You look at like what could the Steelers do better? Ben retired. They had mid to high draft picks. So you couldn't draft a quarterback. You can't move from 20th pick to a top 10 pick to get a quarterback. What quarterbacks were really available for you to go again, make that quarterback better? I think it's one of those things where like, they're just in a bad spot where they couldn't like we really I mean is it we look at what Atlanta did signing Kirk Cousins. That didn't really turn out very well. Like what quarterback could have gotten that I mean Aaron Rodgers, you're kind of in the same boat. Like is that much better than
So
getting
I actually I will say that going back to your premise of, mid to late of the first round, you can't trade up. The Chiefs traded with the Buffalo Bills the number 27 overall pick, a third round pick, and a next year first round selection to move up to the 10th spot to select your boy, Patrick Mahomes.
yes.
So I think it is feasible. I don't think that's really the Steelers' style, is the
No.
problem. That's
It's
not
not
in their
because even look at
DNA.
last draft. If they would have done that, 10th of all, Nick's is the only guy left, right?
Right. McCarthy and Knicks. Yeah, 11 and
Yeah.
12 they went.
So could he be tried harder? I mean, I think there's optimism with Russell Wilson and stuff like that. The year before that, with Pickett and stuff like there's,
That's it.
I think it's a
So
tough spot.
I look at it more like that, actually. I think you hit the nail on the head. The Broncos, after Manning, they drafted a first round quarterback.
Yeah,
If you hit, you can
you're
be a
golden.
dynasty.
Yeah,
If you don't hit, it does set you back years. And the only team that has rinse and repeat that quickly, to my recent memory, is the Cardinals when they went Josh Rosen and immediately went Kyler Murray. But at
yeah,
that point, they also fully like leaned into, the Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray. And the jury's actually still out of if that was a good pick because he's been electric ish, but they haven't
yeah,
done it. So if you miss on a quarterback, it sets your franchise back. And I think when the Steelers missed on Kenny Pickett, they got the first quarterback off the board in a horrific quarterback class.
yeah. They
That
did
would
what
have
they
been
could, but there's not what they could. There's no one there to take.
right. And so that would have they just kind of got pigeonholed to, do you immediately wash it and trade up, or do you write it out? They tried to write it out at least one more season, and now you're seeing the Justin Fields, the Russell Wilson, the Mason Rudolph. You're seeing all the upheaval and all the uncertainty.
Yeah,
So, well, speaking of quarterbacks, Joel,
I think
um,
we take a break. about we finish up anything else you have on the 2024 season, Broncos or league wide.
So I will say this, league wide, there were a couple things that I wanted to touch on that we missed. How crazy is it? Two things, and this deals with, it's not quite ageism, but you understand in one off season and one actually truly just NFL season, Bill Belichick is no longer coaching in the NFL. Jim Harbaugh goes back into the NFL, and Aaron Rodgers falls off a cliff completely into just, well, who is this guy? To
Yeah.
where his career is actually so far completely mirroring Brett Favre's, to where the best thing that the Vikings could do this year is to go and trade for Aaron Rodgers, just so Aaron Rodgers has to still be in Brett Favre's shadow. That part's a joke, but just those were the things that I wanted to touch on was Bill Belichick out and being a college coach Jim Harbaugh becoming a new head coach, and then Aaron Rodgers just being like a shell of his former self. Just
Yeah.
those were the things that stuck out to me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you, I think this, looking at the draft class this year, obviously it's really early. This is a really good draft class that came in the league with the receivers that came in there, the
Yep.
defensive players that came in there. I mean, look at the Eagles; they have two starting rookie cornerbacks starting the Super Bowl with Quinton Mitchell and Cooper DeJean.
Eugene, yep.
They're both starting cornerbacks for him this year in the thing. You got Jared Verse in Los Angeles, who looks like a monster. You got Jane Daniels, who obviously went crazy. You got Bo Nix going in there. You know, Caleb Williams, who with the offense coordinator could be, go off crazy. You look at this draft class. I think we both knew it kind of doing our draft mocks, and we looked at like there was a lot of talent in this year's draft. I wonder, is this gonna be a last year with a loaded draft class because I would have a little bit touch on a little bit here with the transfer portal. Players aren't going to develop as I mean, Bo Nix was in college for I think 35 years.
Just
Become so
about.
experienced
Yeah.
now, and because of COVID year game next year and stuff like that, now players are going to be bouncing around. They may play a little bit more, but they're not developing into the system. Like look at the receivers from Alabama who sat behind everybody. Those deep running back rooms in Alabama, players are just going to leave to go start somewhere else and then bounce around. So they're not going to get the development, sit behind players and learn the game as much as they previously have. So I'm just curious. You look at, how's that going to affect the incoming draft classes moving forward? This could be the last super, super great stack draft class for a while.
And we can touch on that later. I think at the end of the day, the NFL is cyclical in nature, in the sense that you and I started this whole conversation talking about how, oh my gosh, running backs are back.
Yeah,
That was something that a few years ago you'd be an idiot and you'd be fired if you even like mentioned drafting a quarterback or a running back in the first round, right?
yeah.
So I think that yeah, the transfer portal is going to change a lot of things. I think that what's going to happen though, because we talk about the NFL being a business, college football is such a money-based business, right? There's so
Mhm.
much money in the NCAA that if they're starting to see things maybe fall off a little bit. I think adjustments are made to the transfer portal. I think adjustments are made to NIL to where perhaps teams can get a little bit more incentive or players have a little bit more incentive to stay with who they originally pledged their allegiance to. So I personally think that it could be a couple of light drafts. I feel like it'll even out in the end. I think that's just like the wheel keeps spinning, keeps working. So imagine you